Our next guest, Matt Schlapp, is the chairman of the American Conservative Union, the organization that holds the annual conservative political action conference that is widely attended by Republicans. He just returned from a road show last week in the battleground states of Wisconsin and Nevada. Welcome, Matt. Great to see you. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. So I just asked Michael Steele whether those Americans out there that felt, to some degree demeaned, neglected, left behind, Joe Biden himself said the Democratic Party had become a party of snobs in 2016. How are the folks that you're meeting feeling today about the party in this convention?
Well, polling is so interesting. You have this whole idea, you're asking how people feel. I think everybody feels bad. I think everybody feels discouraged. I think, when you've been suffering through a pandemic and an economic shutdown, and then we have race riots, and they turn on their TV and they see cities that they love and care about on fire, and they read about all these kids and people of color who've been shot. And so it's not a time when people are feeling really optimistic about things. At the same time, they feel passionate about what we need to do as a country to turn things around. So I would say it's a very tough time to try to register how strongly Republicans, conservatives, Trump voters feel about getting him reelected, and then take it a couple steps beyond those voters and people who just love the country, people who have relatives who are cops, people who are disgusted by churches being burned and statues being defaced, cemeteries being disgraced. I think that Donald Trump and the Republican Party generally has a real opportunity to really take and make the case against this aggressive socialism we're seeing around the country.
Matt, during your tenure, you have vastly increased the size of the American Conservative Union. I've known your predecessors and your predecessors' predecessors, and I don't think I've seen the ACU as large or as vibrant as it is now. I know this sounds like a silly question to some degree, but what does conservatism mean inside your organization today? What are the top 4 or 5 essential nuggets that stand on their own as opposed to being attached to Trump or to a person?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I appreciate the compliment. It's true. ACU's budget alone, it's like a 5 or 6-fold increase. We've become. We used to always say that we were large, but our budget wouldn't have demonstrated that we were large. And actually, our budget now more equates to the size of our movement. And I think it does speak to the fact that there's a lot of political change. And there's always competition occurring in organizations that are trying to make a difference. And in some ways, people have decided to associate themselves with our event, the largest political gathering on the globe. And we were in 5 countries last year. But this question of what is conservatism, Dan Schneider, our executive director, is probably an amateur philosopher. And he always reminds us that conservatism is a political philosophy where the individual is sovereign. And that might sound a little too much of a 30,000-foot view of current politics, but that really is what it's all about. As a conservative, you believe that the individual should have the ability to chart his or her own life, and that the government should do certain things only when the people allow it to do it, and those things should be written out, and that activity should be confined. And so people mischaracterize Donald Trump because he has such a huge personality, an outsider who was a celebrity becoming our president, probably the second outsider president, but nobody's been like Donald Trump and been the president. I would agree with anybody who says that. And so there's so much associated. They say, cult of personality, and the conservative movement's been hijacked by Donald Trump, and the Republican Party is in shatters because of Donald Trump. I look at it from a much different standpoint, which is Donald Trump sat down with people like myself and asked a lot of questions. And he took a crash course in how the conservative movement and the Republican Party works. And he actually listened. And he actually listened to a lot of people around the country who were forlorn of the fact that both of the major parties weren't listening to what they wanted to see get done. And for conservatives, we had been told by people like Mitt Romney and John McCain all the things we wanted to hear. But now you can see Mitt Romney as senator. He didn't really believe those things he told us at the time. And he seems to be wanting to, pick a fight with conservatives and Donald Trump on almost every major policy area. And so what conservatives really wanted, they wanted to not just see a conservative president, but a conservative president who would fight hard for these issues that we care about. So that's one of the main reasons why conservatives have attached themselves to Donald Trump, because he's willing to not only parrot the lines that these previous Republicans had only parroted, he's willing to fight for these issues. And I think that's a breath of fresh air.
Let me ask you about that for a minute, because I've met evangelical groups, evangelical leaders, which are a huge part of the president's base, and I should note there are evangelicals that support the Democratic Party. They get out their vote more than any other interest group on a per head basis, it seems. Is there space inside your conservative movement, inside Republicans, for some of the issues that they're other religious dominations, the LGBT community, dealing with some of the racial divide issues? I'm just interested in whether your tent is getting smaller but more active, or is there a big tent that still exists for conservatives?
Well, by your own first question, you noted the expansion of ACU and CPAC. And obviously, Donald Trump has been able to expand the coalition from where Mitt Romney and John McCain had it. Remember, neither of those two Republican nominees were able to win any battleground states. And John McCain actually lost states that Republicans almost always win, like the state of Indiana. So they actually were shrinking things. It's Donald Trump that's been expanding things. The question on the LGBTQ community, I think, it's pretty clear that most conservatives actually need, I'm not an evangelical Christian, I'm a Catholic, but I would say most evangelical Christians I know who are supporting Donald Trump, they're not supporting Donald Trump because he's going to go back to like a 1950s view of, prayer in the public schools, or criminalizing homosexuality, or these types of things. I think where most conservatives are today is tolerance, and also a little bit of leave me alone and let me live the life I want to live, and let me raise my kids the way I want to raise them, and let me get my kids educated in the way I believe they should be educated. There's a reduced desire to have like moral codes passed in our Constitution or somehow in federal law, and much more of this idea of a zone of privacy. And the cancel culture and this turn on people of conservative and traditional beliefs and values helps underscore the fact that if you're going to be a Christian involved in any type of a public policy or working for a publicly held corporation, you need to have some rights too. They shouldn't be able to run you out of town just because you believe in the Bible or you have a traditional view of morality. So once again, I think what most Christians are looking for in America today is a president who will actually defend their ability to disagree with these major media companies, right? Almost every dial that you would turn to on the television, or most of the websites that really hate the views and values of people like myself, and they try to make it seem like it should almost be criminal to have these views. Christians and conservatives want to be able to say, look, I have the right to have these views. It's in my First Amendment. I can express it politically. We can come together and assemble. And you don't have the right to restrict my freedom of speech, especially on matters of faith and politics. So I actually think that this is a moment when I think we're bringing people to our cause. And let me tell you, if you've got a cop in your family, there's a 99% chance you're going to be voting for Donald Trump, as this defund movement really is, I find, disgraceful.
Matt, let me just get a couple more questions in with this fascinating discussion. Thank you for these insights. Where are you in terms of thinking about what has to happen next in the economy? Say Donald Trump wins, are we going to have an infrastructure bill? Do we need to look at our energy scene and use America's energy independence moment to leverage other ends? I'm just sort of interested in the kind of agenda of growth, because we still have over 50 million people who have filed for unemployment. We still are going to have a big economic crisis no matter where the stock market is. What is your appetite for national big projects in the future?
Well, let me just first remind everybody that elections are about the future. And I think the big mistake Joe Biden and the Democrats are making is they're trying to look back over the last couple of years, talk about all the reasons that they hate Donald Trump, including what they would call mismanagement of a pandemic like we haven't seen for 100 years. And I think the mistake they're making is they're looking in their rearview mirror. And what I'm hoping President Trump is going to do this week, and what the convention's going to do, is remind folks what the president wants to get done in the next 4 years. And the most important part of that is getting the economy rolling. And so you say, what would a second Trump term look like? Joe Biden has already said he's going to take away the Trump tax cuts. He's going to raise everybody's taxes. He's talked about all these Obama-era regulations he wants to put back on the economy. That'll make America uncompetitive with the globe once again, and he will shed millions of jobs and manufacturing jobs like we did under Obama. What Donald Trump wants to do is exactly the opposite, which is double down on the idea of making America more competitive and trying to bring these jobs and this economic activity back within our borders. And I think he's also going to be a very atypical Republican president. Steve, you and I are old enough. We can remember the second terms of Republican presidents. They're not big successes. Even Ronald Reagan, who's like our patron saint, he had a pretty miserable second term. Yes, he got some big things done, like a big tax cut, and he got immigration reform done, which in the hindsight, I think was a big mistake. But he did get things done, but he got hobbled by special counsel. And I think even the Reagan people would look back on the second term and say it wasn't quite like the first term. And we know what happened with the non-second term of President George Bush 41 and the second term of 43, which was pretty rough, and his approval ratings really dropped. I think Donald Trump would break history again. I think if he gets a second term, I think he might even be more active, because he's been able to accomplish so many things by simply using the power that the president has. And he's indomitable in terms of he will just keep pushing no matter how many bad editorials he gets and no matter how bad the media coverage is. So I would not look for a coasting second term. I think he'll be very aggressive. And I think because of what's happened with this epidemic, this pandemic, I think he's going to be even tougher on China. I think I think our approach to China is going to be, as I said, much tougher and revisited. And I think the polar opposite to what Joe Biden and Hunter Biden want to get done vis-a-vis China.
Man, let me just ask you one last question. This is so much fun.
I just slipped that in there. Was that okay?
Yeah, I know. That was so much fun. We're going to go. This is going to go viral. So the last question I have, I was fascinated. I read your tweets, as you know, follow you, and you tweeted out Hillary Clinton's tweet. What's that?
What have I done now?
No, it was a great tweet. I mean, it's an interesting tweet. You tweeted out Hillary Clinton's comment where she said, Joe and Kamala can win 3 million more votes and still lose. Take it from me. And you said, basically, paraphrasing, that's right. And we can basically, we run up, when you look at this, if Donald Trump is within 5% striking distance, he can turn, a number of states. You listed Nevada, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and others. And I found it a really interesting and smart tweet that really goes back to what Michael Steele and I were talking about before. We both felt in 2016 that was in play, and very few MSNBC friends of ours did. And so you have that insight that within a certain striking distance, that because of the way votes work, let me just throw a snarky thing here. Right now, if you were to kind of step back and kind of look at the voting question, who votes, Postal Service, you would think the Democrats want everybody to vote and Republicans have some concerns with that. As Rachel Maddow would say, tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I want everybody to vote. I just want everyone to vote once. And whenever you have voter fraud, you're diluting all those folks who are voting once and voting legally. The problem with what's going on with what the Democrats have done in California, New York, what they just passed in Nevada, is a couple of things. Number one, the voter rolls are very polluted with a lot of bad information. And sometimes one individual can be on that roll 5 or 6 times. If you use your voting roll, which is aged, as the arbiter of who gets the ballot, what you're going to end up doing, and what they did in Nevada, is you'll put 10 or 20% bad ballots out there, which would allow bad people to potentially fill in those ballots and change the outcome of an election. So this is something Republicans and Democrats should all be able to agree on. Let's make sure that you have to request a ballot one time at your current address, that when you request it, you get to update all the bad information that might be in those voting rolls. I want to make sure everybody gets the ability to do that. Unfortunately, in Nevada, it's so bad, they're not even really having a signature match on these ballots. They're not even mandating that the ballot has to be mailed before Election Day. They're not even mandating the fact that there would have to be a postmark on that ballot. You know, I spent 36 days during the Florida recount. There's great subjectivity that can get involved in a close election. And what you want to do is have systems that reduce the subjectivity. And what the Democrats are doing is increasing the subjectivity, and they're increasing the percentage chance that ballots can get put out into the system and be abused. And we should all be able to stand up against that. It's not one person, one vote when you have the ability to have people intervene with voter fraud. And people say, well, I always love watching CNN or MSNBC. They're like, well, there's not too much voting fraud out there. But shouldn't we want to get rid of all voting fraud? Even isn't just one example too much? They say Russia tried to intervene in our election, and of course Obama allowed them to interfere in our election. I don't want Russia to interfere in our election. I don't want China to interfere in our election. I want our system to be very simple, with one person, one vote. And I don't care if you vote by mail, if you vote absentee. I don't care about. I think that's great. You should have all the choices and all the ways to vote. I've voted absentee in the past at times. I've voted in person times, but let's not forget, even the post office says it loses 5% of mail. The more you do mail-in, the more you're going to have people whose vote doesn't get counted. And if we're going to do a lot more mail-in voting, let's just make sure that we've taken bipartisan consensus from lawyers on both sides that mandate the fact that we don't have any additional voter fraud. Because even one instance of voter fraud, in my mind, is too much. So let me just say very quickly, Steve, on the polling. I think this is right. Hillary Clinton was able to run up the score in states like Illinois and California and New York. Since 2016, many of those states have made it even easier for Democrats to run up the score because they have allowed third parties through ballot harvesting to pick up all of these ballots, right? So even if you don't care that much about voting, someone can hound you and say, I'll come to your house and pick up your ballot. By the way, in some of these, with some of these laws, that ballot doesn't even have to be filled in, which I think is very problematic. So let's say that Joe Biden can run up the score in these states even more than Hillary Clinton was able to do. That's why I believe when you look at nationwide polling, which is pretty much garbage, but when you look at it, if Donald Trump is under 5%, as he is in the CNN poll, that could mean that the race is essentially tied. And then you get to this idea, does Donald Trump have an actual advantage in the Electoral College? And in the conversations I'm having with people in New Hampshire, where much of the polling is bad, but when you talk to the people on the ground, there's a good fit between New Hampshire and Donald Trump. There's a good fit between Minnesota and all of these racial animosities and what's happened to the city of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there's an affinity to many voters in Minnesota with what Donald Trump is talking about with protecting the police, et cetera. And I think we see this in other states like Nevada. Nevada, the biggest dominating factor is, and I just talked to Dan Rodimer today, there's something like 135,000 fewer union workers in all those big hotels in Vegas because of the socialist Democrat governor's shutdown. So he actually could be shutting down the economy to the benefit of Donald Trump. A lot of these states that Donald Trump lost last time are very much in play.
Right. Well, Matt Schlapp, fascinating as always. As you mentioned, we've known each other for a long time. Congratulations on what you've achieved at the American Conservative Union. I tell viewers that CPAC this year had more than 25 million people watching online, individual people watching. An extraordinary footprint in the political scene in America today. Matt, thanks so much for sharing your insights. I hope we can have you back again soon.
Well, let me tell you, I think the Hill is doing really good work. You're doing really good work. It's nice to have an outlet that gives you a fair shot to make your case. And they try to be fair with both sides of the equation. I think if America had more of that, I think we'd be a more harmonious place.
Well, Matt Schlapp, we're not going to argue with you there. Thank you so much for joining us today.